Hi, I'm Alister Benn and you're watching Expressive Photography. Well, this is going to be a really exciting video because Kristin and I, celebrating our marriage last week, are out and exploring in our local area, and we found a real gem of a place. This is a road we've never been up before. It's about a half an hour drive from our home. It is incredible, and the spontaneity of today's shoot has just been so inspiring. So today I'm going to talk about colour in the landscape and how it's speaking to us, how it's telling us where to point our cameras, and then how we can process our images so that we emphasize and articulate these transitions that are naturally occurring, just to make sure that they're nice and clear for our viewers and to satisfy our own aesthetic preference. So the purpose of today's video is colour in the landscape.
As landscape photographers, colour is one of our most profound and impactful triggers. It's one of the things that drags us into the landscape more than anything else, probably even more so than composition, and we only have to desaturate poor compositions, which were taken in amazing light, to tell us how important the light was. Now, what I've tried to do in my Colour of Meaning ebook is to look at colour in a way that allows us to build up a far closer and psychological relationship with it, and understand that when we see things like this in the landscape, beautiful orange trees juxtaposed against pointy, cooler pine trees in an atmospheric landscape, why are we responding to that? What is it about that scene that's sucking us in? And many of the things I discuss in the book are things like how colour and luminosity are connected, how colour and contrast are connected, how the transitions from cool to warm affect us psychologically. So when I'm in the field, I'm very much just responding to the way the landscape is sucking me in. And it's not until I get back to the computer that I really start to think about how to move those tones and hues around in the images to make them feel a bit more harmonious. Now, we did have quite a few little storms coming through, and it was very, very windy, and the only technical consideration we really had was to make sure our shutter speed was fast enough to deal with the rapidly moving vegetation, and even so, it wasn't always possible to get them quite as sharp as we would have liked.
So one of the things about shooting under these conditions is everything is changing so fast. The Scottish weather at this time of year, we're getting fronts coming over, and these weather systems are just coming through, pulse after pulse after pulse, and the light is getting obscured. Clouds are going in front of the sun. It's a constantly changing environment. And in the flat light, we get this beautiful, subtle transitions from warmer colours to cooler colours. And then the sun comes out and the luminosity of everything just rises. And the colours that are naturally more luminous, like the yellows and the oranges, get even more bright relative to the others, which creates more contrast. And I truly believe that there's an energizing quality to yellow and orange colours in sunlight. They just make us feel good. And if I look behind me now, everything's got kind of flat again, but the yellow and the orange highlights are still there. So we're still getting this kind of luminosity path through the landscape that kind of tells us about three-dimensionality. It tells us about shape and form and structure. So even when the light is flat, we still have a lot of visual triggers in the landscape. And then the sun comes out and all of a sudden it just exaggerates everything. So the thing about landscape photography is it's a constantly evolving and changing thing. And if there's ever been a good example of moment by moment awareness, then it's landscape photography.
So since we were out in the field and made that movie, it's rained almost constantly. We're spending a lot of time in the office here at home, and the first thing that really strikes me when I start looking at the photographs that I made on that day is that your perception and relationship with those colours has changed. As soon as we take raw files and bring them into Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw, everything gets sucked away. What we see on the back of the camera isn't what we see in Adobe Lightroom. And what I have here is a selection of 9 processed photographs. So these are photographs that I've already worked. Now, I'm going to dive in first of all to a couple of the ones that we saw in the back of the camera here. So this is the first one that we saw where we had those beautiful orange trees and then receding into the background there with the different misty conditions. And what should be very obvious in this photograph is that we have warmer tones in the foreground receding to cooler tones behind. Now, one of the key things I want to talk about right now is if we take the color away from this photograph, all we have is luminosity and contrast. Now, in my first book, I talk a lot about this. It was the purpose of it was basically saying luminosity and contrast tell us where to look. The more detail there is, the more contrast, the brighter something is. And then by processing things so that we have changes in contrast and luminosity, we can create better depth. We can end up with more three-dimensionality in our photographs. And in scenes like this, it's reasonably rational. It's still quite obvious about the depth and the three-dimensionality and where we should be looking. But when we add colour back in, we suddenly enter an emotional landscape. The relationship between luminosity and contrast and emotions is there, but we respond to colour like no other stimulus in the landscape. And really what I want to talk about today is why I wrote a book on colour in the first place, because it's one of those things that's so every day. It surrounds us for most part. You know, we live in a colourful world. And at this time of year, the landscape is filled with incredibly stimulating colours. And the key thing to notice here is that those yellow colours, the yellow tones, are bright. The bluer, cooler tones are darker. And the orange tones and the red tones are slightly darker. Green tones are a different hue and a different luminosity. We will always be drawn to luminosity. Now you can have warm luminosity in the yellows and you can have cool luminosity in the back. And those two things are telling us different things. One is where to look and the other is where to recede to. Our relationship with colour is so profound. We are being told where to look by the landscape. And in this particular photograph, I just love the way that those warmer tones are framing other tones. You know, so we've got colour contrasts from oranges and yellows into deeper reds and oranges. And then in the background, we've got a completely different colour palette. We have a completely different shape structure. Everything in the foreground is quite rounded. The stuff in the back is much more pointy and angular. And these visual triggers give us reason to move through the frame. There's nothing worse than making a photograph that's just homogeneous. What we're trying to do is to engage, excite, energize, and to give people a pathway through the frame. There's a beautiful expression that I talked about with Julia Anna Gospodaru a couple of months ago on the Vision and Light series, and we talked about the luminosity hierarchy. And in this particular photograph, the brighter areas, which also are corresponding mostly to the yellows in this frame, are telling us where to look. They're creating the melody of the song, to use a metaphor that I've used before. Now, this is a series of photographs that I'm actually quite happy with. I think what we've done is we're using the luminosity of the yellows to dictate the structure of each photograph. And we're using cooler shadows to create almost like a canvas on which those warmer tones can play. we are so inherently linked emotionally with warmer tones. You can't not be joyful. You know, think of yellows and oranges and reds. All of those things are such powerful emotional triggers to us, whereas dark greens, magentas and blues have a very, very different emotional connotation. And again, this is something that I've gone into at great length in the book, is our emotional relationship. So I guess really what I'm trying to do in this video is not just showcase some of the photographs that we took on that day and explaining why it is that they were taken, but you can see clearly in each of the photographs that it's the warm tones that are telling us where to look. Everything else is context. Everything else is there to kind of divide space, to fill up space, to kind of create a juxtaposition or some sort of textural counterpart, you know, so that it's dividing the frame into sort of sensible parts. But these warm tones, every single time, are the thing that are going to draw our eye through the frame. And that's why autumn is such a joyful time for us. We get out into the landscape when we can, and those warm, exciting yellows and oranges just tell us where to point our camera. But it's a really good idea to try and offset that with something cooler, with different textures, different shapes, and that way you're filling your frame with kind of interest and somewhere else for the eyes to rest. We're going to put up a slideshow of all of these photographs at the end of the video, and I hope you enjoy them as much as I do. They're also going to form a portfolio on my website, alisterbenn.com, because I really like the concept of tree formations, you know, one type of tree transitioning into other types of trees. So I kind of like this series of work, and I'm really quite happy with them. If you're interested in diving into the concept of the colour of meaning, please buy my ebook. It's just out last week. The feedback has been phenomenal. It's been really well received, and people are saying that it's really changing their relationship with colour. And in conjunction with the luminosity and contrast ebook, those two things are really providing quite a strong platform for building a better emotional relationship with the landscape. So please consider supporting us by purchasing one or both of those ebooks. Please hit the subscribe button, that's always appreciated. And give me your opinion down in the comments section. Tell me what colour means to you. Tell me how your emotional relationship with colour changes, perhaps with the seasons. Do you have a different mindset in the autumn than you do in the winter, or indeed the spring or the summer? So thank you once again for watching. There'll be no video this Wednesday, but there will be a members video coming later in the week, and then next week we'll be back with more exciting autumn photography if the rain stops. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Alister Benn. This is Expressive Photography, and have a great week, everyone. Bye for now.